What happens when a child has to become an adult? When they have to learn to read the mood, when they have to learn how to read the room, when they become the one managing others' emotions and no one is helping them with theirs. That child grows up, their brain adapts, their body adapts, and they, or we, carry those patterns into every relationship, every job, even every quiet moment with ourselves. So let's first of all bring up Dr. Tian Dayton and make sure that she's spotlight as well. I am so honored to welcome back someone who has shaped my own healing journey and work, Dr. Tian Dayton. We are talking about growing up with addiction. And before you think this doesn't apply to you, consider this. Yes, Tian grew up with active alcoholism in her family. And yet, in my home, there was never even a single bottle or a single substance in my childhood home ever. So why would Tian's work and writings have been so helpful in my own healing journey and in my work? Because it is more about the family dynamics, the unpredictability, the extremes, the rhythms of connection, but then disconnection, and how our brains and bodies adapt to try to figure out what are these unspoken rules and what is my role in that. So I'm so excited and honored to have you, Tian. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And as always, thank you for your work.
Equally excited to be with you, Aimie, and I've been preparing also it because I respect you and I love what you do and I love what we do together.
I've got a question for you. Chaos, growing up in chaos. What does that actually look like? Because there are many people who would not look back on their childhood and be like, yeah, that was chaos. So what does it actually look like to say that would have been a chaotic family dynamic or household?
I think it looks like not being able to handle conflict well. It looks like not being able to handle extreme situations well. So that while things are going along smoothly, the family is not especially chaotic. I mean, my family, we were very well organized. We had help, cooking, and that helped, and cleaning. And so we had a lot of order in the home. We had a lot of laughter. We had a lot of togetherness, endless togetherness. And when something went wrong, something that a more regulated system might manage in this range and then restore back into here somewhere, we went here and we would restore back into there somewhere. There would have to be a period of disconnection and no one would sort of know what happened. No one would sort of know how to find each other again. We each had our own tactic, our own strategy. Power struggles, power dynamics entered at that point. They were always sort of vibrating around the edges. But so that the chaos could break loose when there was conflict. And once that happened, then maybe some rage could happen. Then maybe some dish could get thrown. Then maybe some I'm never this, maybe some tears, maybe some door slamming. That kind of thing. It wasn't that it was constant chronic. It was that it was unexpected and unpredictable, and it felt unmanageable. And we were all left to figure it out on our own.
And so what you talk about is this idea that a child's brain is supposed to be free for play, for curiosity, for exploring things. And yet in this dynamic, that is not what their brain gets to do. Can you talk to us about that?
We were exploring, but we were exploring each other. We were exploring the mood in the house. We were play was in and out. I think I was more sort of creative and had my projects and had, play, I think I identified doing more with neighbors. And children, it always seemed a little bit different to me and almost frivolous because we didn't play in that kind of a way. We we were all we were strategizing and operating, Amy. What didn't feel like lighthearted play. And I think I took refuge in my animals and my projects in nature and my father, who was the alcoholic, but when he was sober, was a wonderful father. And then he was totally lost in a drunken world. And that is the other weird thing about addiction is that I would try to follow him into that drunken world just to find my friend. And, where I found him was so disturbing and so wavy. It's hard to explain. It was like being locked in a ghost closet to find him. So that's the other reality you live with addiction that is different. I think everything else is pretty much the same for you and me. But the part about addiction is that it is so creepy. And my dad, when he was drunk, his whole musculature, you could tell me more about this than I would know, but all I can say is he seemed animal snake-like and, you know, different. Different. What is that? What from a neurological perspective, what was going on there? Yeah.
The different states take over your body. And so you describe these different states in terms of when they're sober, when they're starting to crave, and then when they're under the influence. And those are very different states physiologically as well. And being able to see how that changes the entire person, their posture, where you could look at them and know exactly what state they were in before you even had to say anything. And you knew whether to approach, whether to stay away, just by their body. But then I love how you really describe their mood as well and these rhythms that were happening, because the rhythms are part of what we try to figure out is where in the rhythm are we? Are we in the place where he's going to be playful, he's going to be fun, he's going to be the fun dad? Or are we in this phase, this rhythm that we already know that he's starting to get grumpy, he's starting to experience the withdrawals, he's starting to crave, and he's not really then paying attention to me, though stay out of his way because it's unleashing on you and everyone else? Or is he now in that state where he's had what calms his nervous system down, and maybe he's more loving, maybe he's more
Oh, you bet. But Amy, you're saying something that is, sending lights off in my brain because my father was sexually abusive to varying degrees. Not me directly, but when you're living around that, you're part of it. And part of his craving cycle, I realized when you're talking about this, was sexual. And I think a lot of women talk about that they felt smarmed and sexually violated with no touching occurring. And in my father's case, I've never been able to name that state, but I really think that was a sexually motivated state that I learned to freeze around and then just take off so it didn't come near me. But that's a big aha for me, and I think an aha for probably most children who are raised around that because we would all recognize that state, I think. But you're naming it. Or we're naming it.
Well, we.
We're naming it.
Well, what I love about how you talk about in addiction is you talk about just the messiness of an addiction. It's not just alcohol, for example. There is likely going to be some aspect of a process addiction because what is the addiction but just the seeking of relief of something uncomfortable inside? And that comes in many forms. And so the sexually acting out, or just this unhealthy background dynamic, is part of their nervous system dysregulation. It's not going to always be a super clean box of no. Their dysregulation always looks like only alcohol or only a substance. It just spills over into all these ways to deal with the
Well, and
dysregulation.
eating disorders may have some of those states, right? Because I was just did a podcast with Tammy Simon the other day, and she was, it's public that because it's on the podcast, but she was saying I didn't have alcohol. My mother had an eating disorder. And had we had this beforehand, I would have suggested that that state was maybe when she was reacting to that craving state, because that too, that food scouring, hunting, takes over an atmosphere, and it takes over the way somebody brings food to their mouth, the way they we know this, right? We know this in our bodies, but we're naming stuff today that I've never heard named. I've been in this field for decades, and this is the work you're bringing, are this subtlety. And I think when we pair up, we bring it, we make this very
Food, I have found, is so much a part of most of these addiction processes. And it's very interesting to see what foods do they gravitate to. If it's alcohol, alcohol is still
a
a
food.
food. And there's a reason why that is so helpful for their nervous system. It's not just the intoxication part, it's also the carbohydrates. It's also that form of carbohydrates. And being able to look at food, I remember being able to know as a child, my father is in that phase where he needs food. He's scrambling for food to help manage whatever. I didn't even know at that time what that was. And here's what I can do. I can bring him food. I can bring him food and then quickly get out of the way. And it was just this dynamic of what is enough to give him what he needs to feel good about himself, and yet keep me safe. And it felt like walking this tightrope in this particular phase where he was dysregulated inside and needing something to just settle that. And the subtle games that I would be playing in my mind to try to figure out, what does he need? How do I be what he needs? But yet also know that that is not safe enough for me. So it's a very precarious place to be. A lot of inner tension in me and my body.
Aimie, did it circle around carbohydrates and sugars?
And even protein, because we were a very low protein diet as part of the religion that we were in. And so there would be times where, like, cycles, right? Like his mood cycles, and there was a lot more going on that I discovered later in life that were other processes for his management of himself, and seeing that there would just be these rhythms that were became somewhat predictable in that sense, the predictability of the unpredictable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Of course it makes sense.
And of course, now that I understand more of my work around biology of trauma, being able to recognize he was protein deficient. And part of then that craving for him was like his body needing protein to make neurotransmitters, to make serotonin, to make dopamine. And that was part of the equation for him, for then going into these periods of, I feel out of control simply because he wasn't nourishing himself in a way that would and could stabilize his physiology. And yet, same thing with alcoholism.
same. It's exactly, this is one of the most interesting conversations I've had in years. This is exactly the same thing. And this is why we all identify with each other. This is why we still feel like because let me ask you, if I may, did it accompany behaviors? Like if you didn't get any, there was rage. If you didn't get it, there was belittle, there was cut off. I mean, the same, go to your room. Didn't you get your homework? Sudden, why do you always, all of the stuff that it feeds cognitive distortions and attachment trauma. So then there we go.
Yeah, I felt like I had 3 different dads in a sense. I had the dad who was fun, and he would want to play ball with me, and he would want to go biking with me, and he would actually be present in those moments. That happened so rarely, but still enough times that I kept trying to get that dad back, trying to go find where is that dad, and when I have these other versions of my dad, how do I help him become that fun dad that I know he is, and that I know that that's where he's happiest with himself. So that was part of me then already.
Yes, it's a wonderful statement. Not only am I doing it for me, but I'm doing it for him, and then I'm doing it for us. That's the thing.
100%. And
Yep.
so when he would get into his depression, the depression was something that seemed that I was the only person who could connect with him, who could be with him, who could help him feel a little better about himself, who could make sure that he didn't completely lose himself at those times. Whether that was true or not, that I was the only one, I don't know, but that was certainly the role that I seemed to play in my childhood, given my 2 sisters and my mother. They were not the ones who could be around that, or that he would even allow into that space with him.
Were you the littlest or?
I'm the middle.
He's done that. Yeah, so the least threatening in a way, maybe. Maybe I think in all the families I've worked with, I think the whole middle child syndrome, that people think they didn't get enough attention. I think in attention, I think is really meant to say. I think I said tension. But I think in dysfunctional families, the middles do better oftentimes because they don't get as much attention. I think it's a plus.
Yes, I'm kind of happy with my position.
Yeah.
Because I can see that my older sister had so much pressure for being the performer.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the one who was expected to get the good grades, even though that was still an expectation on me. And I found that that was one way that I could make my father feel better, was to show him that I was also accomplishing, and he could be proud of me and he could boast about me. That was very important to him, to be able to boast about his children. And then my younger sister was the super fun one, which again, for my dad, given his mood cycles, he didn't know what to do with fun all the time. And so this is who I am when I can be the fun dad. But these other states, it was primarily left to me, or I assumed that, in order to help him and thus help the family.
Yeah. These are co-states, we do it together. So it's, he would have it's a mutual choice, right? He chose you, you chose him.
Yes. And then I needed to learn how to choose differently. that was my healing journey. But there was a moment in time that has still stuck with me, and I've never really known what to do with this until I've been reading your book, Growing Up with Addiction, and there were things that it just brought me back to that very moment. I'm standing in the kitchen. I'm about 15, 16 years old. And for both me and my dad, emotional eating was our go-to for managing our emotions. And at that point, and I'm staying in the kitchen. So he's coming in from his office there at the house. And I could tell that he was just in one of those almost like a hypomanic, I feel on top of the world, something really great just happened, and here's my daughter, that I feel the most emotional connection with. And I remember sensing that and remember being like, I need to put some distance. I need to put some distance, but I am grabbing food. I mean, this is what I was doing. I was grabbing food, and so was he. And he came up behind me and just did some things that just felt icky. But in no way would I have said, oh, that was clearly sexual or sexual abuse, but it just felt that way. But I remember the inner paralysis that I had in that moment of, who does he need me to be right now? Not
Wow.
what do I want?
Yeah.
Who does he need me to be right now? Does he need me to enjoy this? Does he need me to I didn't know, which was terrifying, right? Because I'd been able to figure out most of the silent rules by then. And so to not know then left me with an internal just pulling apart of my tissues. I mean, the sensation in my own gut was terror, but I need to be who he needs me to be, or else he falls apart. And I do know that. I know that if I'm not who he needs me to be, he will experience shame, and then he'll spiral out of control, and he'll fall into that depression again, and then we won't see or hear from him for days. It was very...
Wow. That is very powerful. And may I say something about a piece of your history? I know, and you've talked about it in public on many occasions, but could I connect it here?
Yeah.
Didn't your journey start with an emergency room doctor that you couldn't please? As it is the way things work. Exactly. That if we don't resolve it at one place, it shows up somewhere else, and the powerlessness you talk about in the face of that, the falling apart. I mean, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to recall your words, but not being able to manage something that you weren't allowed to manage as a growing young woman or child comes back. And then it's there all over again. And it can be even more devastating because by this time, I'm a mother and a wife, or you're an MD and an emergency room. You know what I mean? We think because we got taller, we got older. You know what I mean? We got degrees, we matured. But only a part of us matured. This other part that is locked within the attachment system. And these open tensions that I love the way you talk about them in your book, and I quote you in mine. Seeking closure, seeking closure, seeking closure. Can you address the insula in that moment? I mean, in that moment when he's coming behind you, and I wanted to make one more point about that moment to add into what I'm asking you. It has to do with your developmental stage too, right? He may have done something that he did many times, and because you were not sensitized at that point, it just felt like, oh, my dad's, grabbing my back, or my dad's, it didn't get marked. But this is a part of parenting that our children enter these developmental stages. And for young women and young men, when you develop sexually, sexual being, your body receives things differently. I remember when my son became an adolescent, I had to just change. I mean, what I normally did was not, leaning over to give him a kiss. I had to be careful of everything that is this was a little boy who started in my body, and I nursed, and so for a parent, and who I hugged, and, it goes so fast for a parent that we don't realize that their developmental stage requires a change in our behavior. But if it's too much of a change, that doesn't work either. If a young woman starts developing and then gets distance from the father who thinks, oh my goodness, she might be, that's no good, because then she wonders, why is he not loving me the way he did? But I'm wondering how old you were, for one thing. And I'm wondering, so much about the biology, how that was recorded and happening inside your body at the time.
Well, there's what I know in terms of the science, and then how I experience that science. And when I had emotions and sensations that, yes, are then being processed in, the limbic system in this insula region of the brain, where the emotions and the sensations of the body come together and they try to make sense. When that is something that not only doesn't make sense, but I can't have the time to make sense of it, because I've got to manage you.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
And so somehow I've
Well,
got to just numb enough of what's going on in me, disconnect enough from what's going on in
yeah,
me, that feels very
yeah.
confusing. It feels very uncomfortable. It feels like I'm dying inside, but I can't
Mhm.
pay attention to that, because if you're not okay, I'm not safe. And so my primary job is not to make sense of my emotions, even if I had a person that could help me with that as a child. My primary job is to manage your emotions and to make sure that you are not experiencing rejection from me, make sure that you're not experiencing any shame as a parent because of what I'm doing as your child. And that, I see, created a lot of digestive issues in me later on. Maybe not immediately, though looking back, there were already, different issues that I had with my gut. But again, I
Because
didn't have time to pay attention to that. It was just a way to,
So how did it create the digestive issues? What's that physiological connection?
well, a lot of it can be summed up in the survival physiology. And when your survival physiology is always on, it's never a good time to eat. So you're never making the amount of stomach acid that actually is helpful to even break down food. You're always in a state of reaction and inflammation in your gut, so that no matter what you eat, there's always this passage of food particles between the cells in your digestive tract that then create more inflammation, that is designed to be able to help your immune system detect danger faster. What are we eating? What's in our environment? Let's take it in so we can analyze it and then know what is safe and what is not safe. Except when everything feels unsafe, then that is what leads to a lot of that opening up of the gaps between the cells. And there's digestive issues, there's bloating, there's pain, there's constipation, there's diarrhea, there's all that. And as a child, we can adapt to that better than when it's been happening for years and for decades. And so what I see is, by the time a person reaches midlife, especially with the perimenopause transition, their body is done trying to adapt to a constant sense of, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do life. I don't know how to do relationships. I'm still trying to figure out the rules with every new relationship that comes across my path.
Mm-hmm.
Now, me specifically, I've also developed stomach ulcers. And the stomach ulcers have now been closely associated with a certain type and certain degree of overwhelm. And it's the same feeling that I have when I was in my family of origin, where I feel like I'm damned if I do something, and I'm also damned if I don't do something. There's no good option here. I'm wrong if I do this, and I'm wrong if I don't do this. There's no option here for me to come out okay.
I often wonder why, because when my family was falling apart, I was getting migraines, I was getting stomach. It felt like incipient stomach ulcers. They were so painful. And then my family fell apart. And it's hard to explain. It was like a house just went like this, just fell apart. The roof, it was all still standing, but the internal house was falling apart. And what I discovered is that it mobilized for me. I look back on it now as the making of me and a blessing, because I got out of a family I didn't know how to get out of. Now, decades it took me to actually get out of something on purpose, because I never went through that passage of chosen individuation, in a conscious way. It left me, but it was a liberation, and I changed my routines, and I had friends over differently, and I took over rooms in the house that were empty and assigned them different things, and I got a job. And I think that was, I'm interested in how many kids who get jobs and figure out they can make their own paycheck realize that thrive with that, because it's very empowering to start adding up and thinking, I could manage a first month, last month, and rent if I needed to. And I think it's the ones who can't get out, who are trapped in the system, and then there is no good choice. But if you are in a system that falls apart, there is some part of you that I think thinks, I don't want to say it out loud, but I think I'm better off. Does that resonate with you in any way?
Resonates a lot, and I'm curious your thoughts on how I managed that delicate balance for me, where I still was not free of the family dynamics, but yet I found a way to create enough independence and in just the right way that I wouldn't trigger my father feeling rejected. Still like the mind games that I played.
I still had to do all that, because I stopped going away for the overnights, and because I was left now with my mother, who, in the Greek order of things, take care of your own mother. I mean, forget that I was 14 years old. That's the logic of the old country. And so I did. I made sure I took care of her first. And boy, did she let me on every little thing. I mean, every little thing. Food, clothing, everything.
So, what was that like then when she passed away?
Well, I lost her way before that, because she was 94 when she passed away. And by then I have to say more before I answer that, I think, because Mom remarried when I was 21, and my stepfather was in the picture a few years before that. Now, we all loved our stepfather. She married a wonderful man who I loved my father, but we also had a really wonderful stepfather. We were very lucky. And he had no children, so he kind of, we became his kids. And Dad died when I was 23, so that loyalty bind was not so, it wasn't choking. I mean, it was still very strong, because I was Dad's proxy on earth. But so I lost Mom then. Once she and Walt closed their bedroom door, and I could hear this kind of weird laughter. I mean, I took it very personally that who closes their bedroom door when they've got a child in the house, so that the child winds up feeling that knocking is sort of like asking for entrance in a royal that I didn't understand that. And and we didn't do that in my home, right? Things were accessible. So that began a loss. And my mom, because I think there was so much envy with my close relationship with my dad, was going to make damn sure that history didn't repeat itself, because Walt and I actually had a really warm relationship. I mean, he taught me how to, use a camera. He taught me how to use the darkroom. We had lunch. We treated me like a daughter. Yeah, I mean, but with a very boundaried, respectful way. But then, and then of course my husband came in and wasn't so nuts about my stepfather as I was. So that was another element of distance. But somehow there were many factors of why I lost mom and we became contentious. And so, but by the time mom died, Walt had died 10 years sooner. And mom and I kept sort of saying to myself, I think if my mother just treated me well, I would get along with her, because I think I know how. I'm her daughter. And I don't think it's me. Although I was convinced it was me for a couple decades. Or she convinced me. She was convinced it was me. Let's put it that way. But I remember eventually I got enough recovery and health to think, I don't think this is me. I come in with an open heart, or an open mind anyway. And I just watch her, make sure nothing, good happens. And sure enough, in the last 5 years of her life, after her memory, I just think she forgot she didn't like me. I think she just, I think she forgot. She forgot that she was so jealous of me and forgot all of these things. And I think I became almost like her favorite child, and she adored my husband and my kids. And so we actually were very close for a number of years. And I really was gratified, because I thought, I'm so glad I didn't close this possibility off, because I got to love my mother. And you know why I didn't? I'll be quick. We used to go to this caper. It was in a hotel. It's kind of like a funky spa. My mother, my sisters, and I, my 2 sisters and I, would go for 5 days or a week or something, and to Florida. And there were massages, but it was all kind of funky and cozy and community-ish. And for those 5 days, because my mother was so narcissistic, she would be very loving and nice to me. In private, she was awful, just awful. But for 5 days, and I remember one time she came on a bus. We were all touring something. She came on and said, Tiani, you forgot your lunch. And I'm like 45 years old, Tiani. So, but I saw myself in my mind wanting to stand up in the bus and point and go, that woman is not my mother. Don't be fooled. She's horrible. She didn't feed me one meal my total teenage years. Don't think she cares about what I eat. She doesn't. And because of the vehemence of my mind inside, my reaction that I observed, I sort of was at a crossroads, and I thought, Tian, try an experiment. Let this in. Let this mother feel good to you for 5 days a year. And even if it's all you would ever get, let yourself have this experience of your mother being nice to you, even if you know it's going to come to a crashing halt on the 6th day, which it always did. But I did it. And it was like my quiet victory. And I kept that love alive in my heart. And I kept that passage, that 2-way passage, so that when it could happen in life, I was there for it. And it did happen in life. And it's a miracle.
Mm. So when you talk about your family falling apart, then what did that look like for your family? What did that look like for you?
Looks like my older sister, we went to Greece for a year, to Athens. We were Greek American. My father's Greek. And he said, he retired, and he said, you don't know anything about your history. So we're going to move to Greece. And then he got drunk and he said, we're not going to move. And my mother said, no, we all kind of like the idea we're going. we packed all up this big Cadillac into the hold and suitcases and a year's worth of everything, and got on ship and sailed across. And at that point, we were a family of 5. My brother didn't come because he was at college at that point. My sister was just beginning college, and she went to the American University in Athens. And my other sister and I went to the American school. Then once we got there, this is the beginning. Now, this was a great year for us. I love living there. And once I adjusted. But Kutsi, my older sister, who had taken care of us, she had been my special person who took care of us. She was our big sister, and she was a sweet big sister by and large. Her boyfriend fell apart, and he was a very serious boyfriend, and they kind of got her to go back. So, and her friend Carol was staying also, so she left. So that went from 6 to 4, at Thanksgiving. And then, and for which I was very sad, not just to lose Kutsi, but for Kutsi to lose this wonderful experience she was having. And it taught me in my head a bad lesson, or a good lesson maybe even, is don't fall in love young because this could mess your life up terribly. And that was the beginning of the falling apart. Then when we left Greece, where Dad was very top of the heap and great social world, and he's drinking, he and Mom spent all this time together, so he drank less, and he felt good about himself, and he was sort of a bon vivant. And we went back, and I think the crash was too unmanageable for him to go back to Minneapolis and fish out of water, and he drank. He just drank his way through that period. He was just drunk as a skunk. And that began a mourning cycle in me of loss. I was losing all of the everything. Kutsi was gone, Nick was gone, now Dad was drunk. And we were just kind of left to try to, we were like carrying little scraps around to try to find nourishment in. And I got involved with the church. I was always involved. We were very much in the church, and that was very helpful. And my grandmother was helpful. And then I left my school. I was at a private girls' school, and I decided I was bored because I'd been at this international school, and I made a change. So that is where the shift happened for me of starting to take care of my own life. So that year of falling apart, I both fell apart, and I made the resilient decision of what were taught in the 50s. When you're in the darkest place, look for somebody who has less than you and help them. That was how we found our way out. And also reach your arm out and help who was ever within this circle. They were very good, solid pieces of advice. So I volunteered to be a candy striper. I started a little camp and made my own way. And then I got a real sense of autonomy, and I decided to leave school and go to the local public school, which was a big shock for my parents, and they didn't like it. And I just said, well, you can drop me off there, but I'm not going in. So I can't believe I said it, but my sister-in-law told me I did. So once I was in public school, I got a job. I took the bus. I had friends who I could get to instead of have to be driven, where my father was drunk. My mother never wanted to go anywhere. My brother was now out of the house, and my sister. So I was just a sitting duck. So once I took charge of my life, it was very sad. I was carrying a lot of sadness, but I was also having a lot of fun. So that's how falling apart looked for me. It was extraordinarily painful and extraordinarily empowering. Does that answer?
Yeah, no, that answers really well. And I am appreciating this idea of holding so much grief, and yet at the same time, that's not what it looks like at that time, right? Like it looks like becoming more independent. It looks like becoming more of figuring out what you want and what you want to do. And then I think over time, that grief becomes more obvious, more apparent. And there comes a time of reckoning where we have to realize that what we went through did cause us grief and needs to be grieved.
That's exactly what happened for me. And the reckoning, would you like me to respond to that?
Yeah.
The reckoning came, one of the positive decisions I made, I had gained 10 pounds in Greece because, that's was the nature of the place. And so I sat at the diet table because the food at Northrop was awful anyway, so I might as well eat cottage cheese and rice. So I got myself in terrific shape. I went to this new school looking great. I was embraced fast. And that gave me a 2-year reprieve to be this kind of happy seeming girl. And then it started to catch up to me when I realized the gap in the way other kids seemed to be lighthearted and the way I wasn't. And I remember one defining moment, this darling girl, you know, stressing out about her prom dress. And I remember just looking at her and thinking, but my first thought was, you're stressing out about your prom dress? Do you want to know my life? And then I remember thinking, Tian, maybe if you don't resent her for her good fortune, God will smile upon you one day. This girl is doing nothing. She's lucky. That's all. And that's what happened. And then my senior and my junior and senior year were just sad. And I changed. The grief started coming out. And then I started making different friends. And a lot of very deep friends, poetry, artists, creativity. We could talk about subjects because we all had unhappy homes. And we didn't have to hide so much. And then I went to the university, and there was another reprieve. It was just fun, and so it went in cycles. And I think because I grieved, I could have life again, and then I could make decisions, and all of my decisions tended to be practical and propelling me forward. Because, really honestly, I was talking with my husband about this more. I don't think I ever lost my moral compass. And I really listened in Sunday school all my life, and I had really a lot of moral upbringing. And I think that's what got me through. And I think we don't talk enough about a moral compass. And it's a real loss of our religious institutions because, and they deserve to be reexamined. They need reexamining, but we shouldn't lose them because we need good orderly direction. And if that's your 12-step program or your church or your temple, or it doesn't matter, but we need a moral compass, and we need to be taught and held and cared about. And if we lose that moral compass, we're in big trouble because we have nothing to base our decisions on. I mean, when my father became so dysfunctional, I remember I remember having a moment of reckoning, and I thought, I have to take it from here. I was in about 10th grade. I have to take care of my mother, and I have to take care of myself. And I remember I'd ask myself, what would my good father, want for me? And then I would figure out how to want it for myself, because I knew I had that love. It was just gone. It was not available, but I had it, and we can get it from somewhere.
Mm. It really ties into the attachment threads that run through everything. And looking
Yes.
back on my childhood as you're speaking, I can see how the church provided a container and a predictability for me that I didn't
Yes.
have in my home.
Yes.
And if I hadn't have had that, I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know what I would have done, because it provided one place in my life where there was this predictability, almost, yeah, black and white type of you have church service at this time every single week, whether it
Yes.
snows, whether it rains, whether whatever. Like
Yes.
there's just this attachment to safety, to predictability through that that can be of huge value and service to people who are otherwise in chaos. And
It's everything.
yeah,
It's a lifeline.
it is a lifeline. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's nice we can talk about that.
It is, looking back, to be able to see those people, places,
Mhm.
things that were a lifeline for us is
Mhm.
so helpful. Yes, there's a lot to grieve. And being able to look at the timelines that you do with the relational trauma repair, this
Mhm.
idea that there were resources for me, or else I would not be here today. There were
Yeah.
resources for me along the way at strategic times when I most needed it.
Yes. Yes.
It was there for
Yeah.
me.
We have to build resilience. We can't just dismantle. And I think one of the things that I talked with Tammy about also, but she was talking about recovery and what you do at a certain stage. And I said, it's not going to sound popular to say, but at a certain stage in recovery, it just takes some discipline. When you just decide not to keep going down the rabbit hole, you decide to be responsible for the state of mind you are in and see what you are attracting into your life and asking yourself, how did I get myself into this? What did I do to create this? And you own your side of something. It's not just the chronic victimhood is, it's a dark narcissism, really. It's a sort of a dark narcissism,
It is. And I feel like this is where I got that from Al-Anon. I got that from 12-step recovery. I did not get that piece of personal responsibility from the church. I got predictability from the church. What I got from Al-Anon was this,
Yeah.
Aimie, like, you're creating this, you're choosing this. And that for me was when I started to form a very specific image that helped free me from my family dynamics. And I'll end with this and then kind of throw out that famous quote from Al-Anon and have you comment on that as we close. But what I saw as my father was him in a mud pit.
Mhm.
I'm outside of the mud pit, but I'm trying to help him get out of the mud pit. But instead of helping him out, he's just pulling me in. And being able to see it in a visual that way allowed me to free myself from those ongoing dynamics that I was contributing to. The dynamics are always created by two people. So
Yes.
I am creating that dynamic, and until I change, the dynamic is not going to change. Of
How
course,
did you see that?
You see that, Aimie? You just saw it in
I
your
don't-
mind?
yeah, I don't remember, honestly. I just remember getting this very clear visual that allowed me to see the role that I had been playing and my choice in what to do next. Did I want to continue to be pulled into the mud pit, even though I had great intentions of being the one to help him out? And
That's very good that you saw that. That's great.
it was, it was foundational for me to then have that pivot in who I was and the role that I was willing to continue to play in our dynamic. Choosing to no longer play that role had drastic consequences on our relationship. We haven't spoken for 10, 15 years.
Well, that says everything about what you were dealing with as a child and why you knew in your body saying no was not a possibility. That's what you
Saying no is not a possibility
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to wrap that thought, parents cannot be perfect a lot. But if you allow your imperfections to be named and called out by your kids and you kind of own them, even in a flubbed up kind of a way, okay, I know it, the kid's so much better off because they don't have to go underground with them. I've seen that in family systems a lot.
Yes. And as a child, I knew that if I did not be there in the pit with him, he was going to sink. We were going to lose him.
Yeah.
So,
And he was going to make you suffer.
and he was going to make me suffer.
You're saying something so important.
And so once I became old enough, then I was able to see that dynamic for what it was and make a different choice about who do I want to be now, given that I am an adult. I don't have to play that role anymore that I did feel I had to play as a child when losing him in this mud pit, having him actually sink was a very real risk.
And having him take you with him. And that's really the opposite side of the making you pay. I mean, I think the message is you don't separate on penalty of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this conversation has really opened up a few more things for me in my childhood that I need to go process. One of them being having more clarity on exactly the role that I took on as a child, which for me, I took on the role of my dad cannot feel ashamed or rejected. It's my job to have him feel good about himself. And
That's
being
so
able
much
to,
clarity.
yeah. I mean, thank you. Like, this is the clarity that I've been able to have from this conversation. And then being able to see all these other different scenarios that happened, even around our family trips and our family vacations. And wow, like the dynamics, but being able to see them through this new lens of, yeah, he was in his rhythm and he had been in a certain place when he had decided to take this vacation. But at the time of the vacation, he was already in a very different place.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and being able to see that clearly, like it actually wasn't about me. It actually wasn't that I had failed to do my homework. And so now we're going to cancel the whole trip because you're, a failure as a daughter. It actually had nothing to do with me. It was just his rhythms, and being able to have clarity on that from this conversation is very helpful. Now, you have really highlighted the value of a certain quote from Al-Anon that I'd like to end on because of how life-changing it can be for those listening. And that quote is, a relative quote of that is, love the person, hate the disease.
It's really, my mother taught me to do this because
My mother went to Al-Anon when I was a teenager. And she used to use the slogan, this is part of battering rams, but at the same time, like, I'm sorry you feel that way. You couldn't tell my mother anything. She could just say, I'm sorry you feel that way and erase you. But much of what I learned from her about Al-Anon was so helpful. And she told me that they tell us to love the person and hate the disease. And I don't know how much of it I really observed and used, but in retrospect, I observed more than enough of it because I loved my father and hated his disease. And Mom really did. I remember we were talking about the sexual abuse, and he said, I said, well, how did that go? Oh, she said, well, he only did that when he was drunk. And I said, Mom, do you know how that sounds? And she said, oh, I know, it sounds terrible. But what I mean to say, and is that was not your father. Your father would never have done that as a sober man. Your father adored you, all of you. And it hit me like a lightning bolt, and it was so loving and kind. And my parents had been troubled and pain and divorce, but they never were mean about each other. I remember one time Dad sending me money for a plane ticket to visit him in Florida where he'd moved, and I complained about something, and Mom said, he sure had to settle for the crumbs of fatherhood. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, this is the man who adored you, who worked so hard for you, who dreamt all these dreams for you, and look where he is now. And he has to send you a ticket to visit him. I mean, I didn't, but it was a very loving thing to say. And I remember, to stick up for him after all they'd been through. And many years later, I mean, like in the last few years of her life, I said, Mom, you and Dad didn't rag on each other and stuff. I mean, how did you do that? And she said, well, we knew this. None of this was about you. And my mother wasn't just like the most generous person on earth. She was just being honest. And somehow they both understood this was not our fault. But they didn't just understand it and say to me, Gus, none of this was your fault. In fact, I don't think they ever said that. But they acted like it. They didn't make it our fault. They never suggested it was our fault. So, and I think her Al-Anon and my dad's Greekness, my father's wisdom, I think he understood if we thought he didn't love Mom, we would feel unlovable, right? He knew this kind of thing from his Greekness. And so he never spoke meanly of her. He said, you're a very good mother, she's, it doesn't, it was always positive about each other. And I think a lot of the more modern, people today think, just sit down with the kids and say it's not your fault, as if that's going to penetrate if you don't back it with behavior. So I think all of this is separating, and loving the person and hating the disease is actually a very fair thing because it is a disease. And what we need is awareness. So whether it's the food and your father and the lack of protein and, or my father and his inability to find a better tool. And he has many reasons for not finding it. He should have, but I understand. It's not so easy.
It's not easy. And I think that that's the work that each one of us is called to do, is to reach a place of understanding, knowing that in some ways I have done the same. I have sought out things to numb. I have sought out things to manage things. I am sure that I have hurt people in the process, and it looks different, but we still share our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that humanness is what I can see in each person beyond their disease, whether it has a diagnosis or not. It's just, it's still a disease process, still a physiological process. And I can love the person and hate
And
that
I think
physiological process.
You're bringing that to the field, Aimie.
You're bringing clarity on the physiological process. We don't talk about that. We've moved the field pretty far in our generation of trauma and neurobiology. But you are bringing that. That's why I'm so excited about, when in this model where all the trainers in RTR did a chapter, I do the first chapter, yours is number 2. I mean, I'm so proud of it. I love it. It's so important. What you're doing it's really important.
Well, a reflection back on you, because you've been a leader in the space from the very beginning when it was still very popular to only do cognitive behavioral therapy and talk therapy. And you're like, no, it's got to be in the body. Relational trauma has to be in the body.
I was sort of going, woo, I'm trying to, I honestly think if I didn't look so normal and dress in such an ordinary way, that I think that's part of what made me easy to listen to, is that I am so normal. I'm not wearing kind of wacky anything, and I'm not wacky, but it was hard enough to hear what I was saying way back then. And I had to explain myself like endlessly. And I don't have to anymore. People are getting it. It's remarkable. It's so cool.
That is what you helped create.
I was a part of it.
which then allows someone like me to come in and not have to work as hard because
Yeah.
you paved the way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But you work hard in what you're bringing forward, and I see how hard you are.
Absolutely. Well, let's wrap up. What last words of hope would you want to share with people who are recognizing there might be?
I thought that was not from them.
No, there might be. Yeah, there might be more to grieve from my childhood than what I even knew. What would be your final words of
I
hope?
would say at 75, and I'll be 76 in April, do not feel bad because every new stage of life triggers. I mean, I find something to grieve weekly. My poor husband, he hears about it. Well, he would say every morning, but and he would be right. But I'm always clearing out something, and things just get triggered when they get triggered. And what happens is that triggers. What I ask myself is, why am I reacting to this small thing in such a big way? And that just means there's something there to look at. Now, whether if that's to grieve, if that's to be aware of it, whatever it is, it's an unending process. We live
And the ability to
forever.
move through that in the moment, daily, just the daily cleaning.
The daily cleaning. I think it's just like cleaning a house. You wouldn't expect to clean it and then come in a month later and you wouldn't expect it to still be clean. I don't know why we think we're different. We're just as changeable and dust, accumulating and all that stuff. We live in a world. We are prey to everything. The flesh is heir to everything.
Well, for me, this latest book is a next layer for me. So thank you for
Let me hold it up with you.
Ah, look at that.
That's fun.
So
Thanks for your great response.
yes, of course. I love how you continue to be a mentor for me and a guide in my own healing and showing me, there's another layer there. There's another layer there. Let's clean that out too.
Thanks.
We will highly encourage everyone to grab this book, whether or not you had addiction in your family. Again, this is not my story, but it is my story because I
think that's worth exploring some more together on another occasion, Aimie, because it's really important. This is an important thing that we were talking about.
Let's do that. And
Let's do that.
I love spending time with you. A great message to remember from this conversation is that healing is like cleaning a house. You wouldn't clean the house and expect it to stay clean even a month later. Our nervous system works the same way. Throughout the different stages of life and even one experience to another, it can surface things that need to be processed, integrated, repaired. Tian's new book, Growing Up with Addiction, is now out, and whether addiction was part of your family or not, it's such a great reflection into our early life experiences, those family dynamics, and who we needed to become, and I strongly recommend the book. You'll find links to Dr. Tian's work and her book in the show notes, as well as a link to my new YouTube channel called Songs of the Inner World. This is music that I've composed where I share different aspects of my own healing journey, things from inner child work and grief, and even teaching my body that it was safe to breathe. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Until next episode, lots of love.